Annemiek zou het gooien als het...
Oh, Annemiek is haar komen. Dat is het.
Panel
Ja.
zitten.
Oké.
Ik zat me al af te
Ladies and gentlemen.
Dat ze wegging.
Oh, die ging
Oh,
weg.
oké. Ja, ze was
Nou.
een beetje ziek, zei
Maar
ze.
dan moet de stoel weg.
Dan moet Peter weer wegkomen
Ja.
zitten.
Please take your seats. Microphone. Thank you. Can you all hear me? Yeah, sounds good. Thank you. So next is our roundtable discussion, and here also we have some online input. And the idea was to first kick off with a short pitch by Anthony Akpen, who is the Delta Alliance Wing Coordinator for Nigeria. Anthony, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Floor is yours. Please go ahead. Keep it short, loud and clear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. First of all, my apologies for not being able to be there in person with you. I'll be speaking on Niger Delta challenges and way forward for sustainable development. So I will take it from the perspective of introduction, challenges, way forward. Like we know, the Niger Delta issue in Nigeria is not a new issue. The area which is described as the Niger Delta region of Nigeria lies between latitude 40 and 60 north of the equator and 40 and 80 east of the Greenwich. It comprises the states of Akwa Ibom, Cross River, Edo, Imo, Rivers, Bayelsa, Delta, Abia, and Ondo states, making it conterminous with all of Nigeria's oil-producing states, stretching over 20,000 kilometers of swampland in the littoral fringes of the country.
Anthony,
yeah?
Just a short note. Can you please maybe keep your microphone a bit closer and speak more slowly?
Okay.
Oh, no, not too close. And just make sure it doesn't move, because we've got some additional noise. And please speak slowly. That makes it easier for people to understand, hopefully. Please go ahead.
Okay. Okay.
This is better.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, this is better. Please slowly, loud and clear. Thank you.
Okay, I'll take it slowly. So I was just saying that the Niger Delta comprises of the state just mentioned, and it embraces one of the world's largest wetland, over 60,000 of Africa's largest mangrove forest, one of the world's extensive. So it's also this thick aquatic environment which embraces marine, brackish, and freshwater ecosystem. It encompasses the most extensive freshwater swamp forest in West and Central Africa, and manifests an intricate network of creeks, rivers, swamps, Bridget, Oxbow Lake, beside flat stretch of Petal and Mustang. So basically, in terms of nationalities, it includes in terms of nationality, it includes Ijo, Urobo, Shakiri, Yoruba, among others. Besides the 35 billion barrels of proven oil reserves, and besides an even larger deposit of natural gas. Besides the region also accounts for over 80% of Nigeria's gross domestic product and represent the economic jugular of the country. So one of the main challenges that has been over time has been the issues of conflict resulting from oil spills and gas flaring, are major sources of environmental damage and habitat loss in the Niger Delta, affecting local population dependent on agriculture and fishing for their livelihood. The erosion of these traditional livelihoods reduces the ability for people to recover from economic and environmental shocks, such as flooding, pollution of air and water sources also damages the health of communities living nearby affected areas. And recent research estimates that children are twice as likely to die in their first month of life if their mother lived near an oil spill before conception. This pollution is a result of poor operational standards from oil and gas companies, poor regulation and enforcement by government, pipeline sabotage, and crude oil theft. So that's just basically the main issues around the challenges of the Niger Delta. So way forward, we think to meet these challenges, we propose 10 guides to conflict-sensitive development for the Niger. The first one will be to be mindful of the region's vulnerability to a long history of conflict, underdevelopment, political marginalization, and environmental harm. Secondly, it would be interesting to focus on local priorities, accelerated development, safety from crime, political rights, environmental protection, and opportunities for employment. And thirdly, maintain an ongoing dialogue with all types of local groups and listen to their separate expectation, opinion, and concern. And I think this is particularly interesting in the context of this conference discussion of interdisciplinarity and bringing in the social sciences into the issues around data. I think this becomes very, very imperative. Also, to put people in charge of their own futures through sensitive initiatives that are locally driven, managed, and monitored. For every future intervention, there's need to assess potential to excavate or mitigate local conflict dynamics, avoid creating winners and losers situation. Also need to link conflict mitigation to development strategies, aim to make peace development outcome rather than a precondition for engagement or assistance. And also they need to pull the risks of development investment by seeking reliable, committed partners in government, civil society, and committees and the private sector. Encourage responsible corporate practice towards people and the environment in line with international performance standards. It's also important to promote security, peace by upgrading public relations skills of local police and armed service personnel, link them to community peace building institutions. Strive to be flexible but remain focused and persistent. We think with all of these, by supporting and applying these methods of conflict-sensitive planning, all friends of the Niger Delta can contribute to peace, a durable peace that becomes an outcome of collective effort for regional development and their crowning achievement. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Anthony. A pity you couldn't be here. It was a plan he would be here, but also visa problems. Apparently that's all around the world now. So please, whenever you need a visa for a conference like this, maybe even a year in advance is advised. It's quite. But thank you for being here virtually. Thank you for this great photo also, by the way. You look very handsome, as always. And then I'd like to move to another Delta Alliance Wing coordinator from the Mekong Delta, who was also supposed to be here but couldn't be here for other reasons. Chao Kwang, could you maybe shortly reflect on our topic of redesigning deltas from your beautiful delta? Please go ahead.
Yes, good morning. I would like to thank the organizer for inviting me to this conference. Please allow me to have a brief introduction myself. My name is Wang, an associate professor in hydrology, water management, and climate change adaptation at the Institute for Environment and Resource, Vietnam National University. I'm also the coordinator of Mekong Delta Wing of the Delta Alliance since 2018. I have conducted several research projects in Mekong Delta related to hydrological extreme, hydrological change, climate change, and its as well as its impact on the livelihood farmer, urban flooding, river erosion and deposition, and sand mining. Yeah.
Thank you. That was your introduction. Is there any reflections you'd like to share with us on what you've heard so far? Or is this enough for now? That's my question to you.
Colin, please.
The connection is very bad, so maybe we'll leave it here for now. Thank you for your introduction. So what you see here, people, is 3 wing coordinators. We've already heard Peter, so I suggest now we move on. Please stay online, wing coordinators. Thank you for being here with the group of people here. Some of you you've already heard in the previous session. There's 3 new people. I'd like to start with them. Start with Janne-Marie. What's the English word for that? Rijksadviseur, special advisor? Or?
I'm state advisor.
State advisor.
Yeah.
So could you maybe briefly say something about that role? Because I think it's a very important role, it's a special role, and maybe also reflect on what you've heard and how, from your perspective, you look at the redesigning issue.
Yeah,
Please go ahead, floor is yours.
I'm glad to do that. Thank you for being here. I am appointed for 4 years as state advisor for the physical living environment. I think we as Dutch people think that we are very good at planning and designing. And I think we are, but the last 25 years, the focus in planning and design was very much on the short term. And now we see that we also need to look further ahead for the long term. And in those 25 years, of course, a lot of good things also happened, like the Delta program Peter told us about. I think that was a very brave step to have a program to look further ahead to 2050 and even 2100. And now we look even further ahead in 2100. And that long-term thinking is what I will try to be the new standard also in thinking in policy and linking research and policy. And I think that design, I'm a landscape architect, and I think designers are what Annemieke also called emulsifiers. I think designers are emulsifiers by nature, to link long-term and short-term, to link all kind of disciplines, to link the practice with theory. And the motto of our, we are with 3 state advisors, and we have a motto that is the 22nd century starts now. So that calls for the long-term view and also acting in the now. And I think that is very important. And I heard a lot of nice examples. And I also heard a lot about the paradigm shift we are looking for, or we are in the midst. I don't know. I hope we are in a paradigm shift. And from my own experience, I have gone through 3 different paradigms. I think and that's also a generation thing. My father was trained as an architect in Delft. And he very much came from a technological paradigm. And he was raised in the vulnerable part of the Netherlands, Zeeland. So for him, making the Netherlands safe again was quite a task, and technology would help us. And I was trained as a landscape architect in Wageningen, the Green University. And my paradigm was the ecological paradigm. But still ecology with in service of humans. And when we speak about nature-based solutions, I think we are seeking for solutions for us as people, whereas nature-based thinking is a step further, that we are part of nature. And there comes the third paradigm, and I'm so hopeful that the new generation embraces that third paradigm. That's the inclusive paradigm. It's not nature inclusive, but it's human inclusive. And that's what we can learn from Bangladesh, I think. That's so different when I hear you talking about we take water as a given, and then you mean water as a natural given, and not like that we take water as a given by flushing the toilet with drinkable water. So I think those three perspectives, technological, ecological, and you called it a prosperity perspective. I think that's great. But it's a human inclusive perspective, and we need them all three, but in the right mix. And that's what we need these emulsifiers for. So that for a start.
Interesting. And are you just hopeful, or are you also sure that actually it's unavoidable that we go that direction?
Oh yeah, it's unavoidable.
So it's more than hopeful, actually.
Yeah,
It will happen.
Hope is what keeps me going.
Yeah. Interesting. There's also a nice connection maybe to somebody else you have not heard yet, Gijs van der Bomen. Maybe shortly introduce yourself. He's a world-renowned architect, but also with quite some interesting experience worldwide in places where you actually had to connect the designing with the locality and the people. Can you maybe shortly say something about yourself and about those experiences?
Yes, I'm Gijs van der Bomen. I'm a landscape architect as well, but also urban designer, and design director of Kuiper Compagnons, which is a company that has been active in Holland for more than 100 years. We designed, we always say, we made plans, that's a better expression, for every inch of the country at one stage in these 100 years. So we're on top of our mind is very much that we need to be prepared for the future in the coming century, and that we should become a land with a plan for that long perspective and of that long perspective. And I also would like to compliment you and your country on bringing the narrative of the long-term future and the DNA of society in the Delta to the minds of the people. This program to have every academic thought what the Delta of Bangladesh really is. That will help so much in bringing this endeavor that your society will be on to top of mind of many students, of all young people who are getting educated. And I think it's very, very important to do so. And I learned that it's like that from working on, among other deltas, on Jakarta. I was heavily involved in the NCICD, the Great Garuda plan, in which we tried to make the combination of grand scale urban development, bringing also the funding for the Delta works that were needed to save 12 million people who were living in North Jakarta. And to an extent, it didn't work. And it didn't work because with all good intentions, we did not manage to get the narrative across and embed it in the roots of society, in the kampungs, in the societies of the fishermen. We had all good intentions to mitigate the effects it had on their lives, but the story was just not told in the right order and in the right emphasis, and maybe also not by the right people. And that's been on my mind ever since. This is now 6 years ago or so. how can we help the people in the deltas in our country, but also in the deltas of the world, to buy into all the actions and stories that are needed. And that's the fishermen, the local fishermen, but also the financial community. You need basically everybody for the grand works that we have to undertake in the coming decades. And like you say, the next 100 years start now. So we need those storytellers, and we need imagination, seduction through images, imagination and imagine. The basis of that verb and that word is image. I think that the narratives of the future of the people in the deltas of the world start with telling stories through images. And I think that there's a great task for the designing community to show the future that can be. Researchers dedicate their life to show the future that will be and to be as sure as possible about that. Engineers show or dedicate their life to how to work with that. But designers show the future that can be. And if they are good, they will create sparkles in the eyes of the children of Bangladesh and of Holland. And that will give the energy that we need to achieve this.
Interesting. It indeed dovetails very nicely what Salim said. So it's maybe it should not be fear or risk driven, but rather prosperity driven. Or that's also what even in the Netherlands, I mean, people still smoke, and it doesn't apparently work to scare them off with what the consequences might be. But people are actually they want to be seduced by images or what the pros could be. Very valuable lesson, and for those, is it still on the internet, I think, that NCICD thing?
Yeah.
Because it's quite, if you talk about redesigning, I think it's one of the big examples of what was attempted once, 30 billion euros, 30
Yes, it was,
years.
We tried to connect the national symbol of Indonesia, the Garuda, with the design of the new waterfront, and at the same time create a new future for North Jakarta and for the governmental capital. And the fact they're moving to Borneo as Kalimantan is, I think, somehow, you can see that as a defeat.
So apparently we as Dutch and partners have not managed to keep the capital in Jakarta.
Well, that's a way of putting it, but I would not go that way.
Well, at least I think it's quite an interesting lesson that we can maybe learn and also take more lessons from it and maybe make it part of the convergence program and thinking. And that brings me to another panel member, Arjen van Timmeren. You're within the Convergence Alliance director of the Resilient Deltas part of it. Could you maybe also, because I'm not sure if everybody knows about the Convergence program, shortly introduce that, your position, and how you reflect on what you've heard and what your ambitions are?
Yeah, sure. I think, thank you, first of all, for being here. And yes, the Convergence is actually an initiative, an alliance between three main universities, TU Delft, Erasmus University, and Erasmus Medical Center next door here. And it tries to build upon what we also see in our room here today. We all share the same sense of urgency. We all share the same kind of aims or action, let's say, our drive, in our case, related to deltas. But we need also to find ways to do this more effective, more fast, and through what we call transdisciplinary working. And this is why we, let's say, joined forces in these three knowledge institutes, alpha, beta, and gamma sciences. but also jointly with partners like Delta Ares, with public administrations, because I think this perspective requires this kind of joint approach, a movement, as is being said by Chris as well. And this is also what is something we can, what is very obvious today here, that there's no difference in our sense of urgency, and that we need to act now and with people, not talk about people, but do it with people, co-create. But of course, the next step is how. What do we have to do different? It's about learning, it's about building, listening better to each other, it's about new methodologies, and about new tools. And of course, here, knowledge institutes come also up front, because they can help making these tools, and also help, of course, in the reflective perspective of speeding up this science to implementation and solutions roadmap. Because, I mean, the urgencies that was very clear today, they are this kind of a sequence of crises. We're not just talking about climate crisis, of course, was upfront a lot. But we're also speaking about economic crisis, biodiversity loss, and in the end, food. It was mentioned in the Bangladesh context, and I think it was very important, because often we now say we put urbanization in front of, let's say, other functionalities like agriculture, and in particular deltas have the most fertile soils if you compare them on average. So it's 1.77 times more fertile than the global average. And what are we doing? We are pushing out agriculture from these deltas. So it's actually perhaps a short-term solution to solve, let's say, climate change challenges or others. But in the long term, it will really create other problems, and they have to do with food, let's say, the supply of our own food. So this not only the multi-focus, which is necessary, but also the temporal, the long-term, short-term, and all these challenges, take them together. That makes it extremely complex. It requires system thinking, as was told before by Delta Ares, but it also requires that we join forces and build this alliance, which Chris, as a chair here today, is trying to do with these 2 days. And I think that's what we share as a Resilient Delta.
Interesting. And maybe that's also some interesting questions to follow up on with Salim Hoek and Hans Momma's. You point at the difficulty of juggling the various, I would say, societal challenges, and what the role of deltas or maybe adaptation is in it. Annemiek, who had to leave, unfortunately, mentioned mitigation first, and that appealed to me a lot, because in a way that's maybe a core challenge, but at the same time we have to do other things. So my question to the two gentlemen would also be in the Netherlands and in Bangladesh. How do you balance that? How do you juggle with obtaining your position in the societal and political agenda, also accepting and recognizing that there's other challenges that are maybe equally or maybe even more important? Maybe that could also be a question. Are there challenges that supersede the other? Sometimes, for instance, in terms of adaptation, I think perhaps the future should be that we do not talk about climate adaptation anymore, because it's mainstreamed with other challenges. How do you see that in Bangladesh?
Well, in Bangladesh, I think one of the aspects of this issue is that, first of all, I would say in terms of climate change alone as an issue, the level of awareness in Bangladesh is extremely high. Everybody in Bangladesh is aware of climate change. So we are moving well in the direction of understanding a common problem and then figuring out what the solutions to that problem should be. And that is a very huge step forward, because the solutions are not one-size-fits-all solutions. The problem is for everybody. We're all going to suffer the impacts of climate change wherever we happen to be. But when it comes to what do we do about it, it depends on who we are, where we are, and who we are. You know, I'm a university professor, I have one role. Students have another role. Government officials have another role. If they're in the agriculture department, they have one role. If they're in the water department, they have another role. So everybody has their own disaggregated area of knowledge, expertise, and actions, but we all need to be thinking of it together. And that really is the challenge for us, to be holistic as well as focused, and find the balance between that. And that's what I was trying to share. In Bangladesh, that's the direction of travel. It's what we call a whole of society approach. Everybody, including little children, need to understand what their role is and be part of that progress of the country going forward, facing multiplicity of challenges. You know, today it's one challenge, tomorrow it's another challenge. They're all interlinked challenges, by the way. Very often the solutions to multiple challenges are the same solutions, but nevertheless, they look like different things when they happen, but they're not necessarily always different things.
Interesting. Yeah. Hans, how do you see that? Because the PBL, the Netherlands Assessment Agency, of course, touches upon many of the big societal challenges. How do you see that whole package?
It's one of the bigger challenges to come to actionable agendas within this enormously complex situation we're in, because we're moving from agriculture to industry, decarbonization, glaciers, etc., etc. So how do you get beyond an abstract discussion of all the topics in themselves to something which tends to look like a program? and that has been our struggle also when we start to think about our working program for the long term. So we had a big discussion in our organization in 2016 about, okay, so we have all these topics, yeah, but that's not a program. So how do you get from topics to a program? So that means investing in knowledge, investing in thinking through the interdependencies. So what are the clusters in these topics? Yeah? Where can they be related to one another? So we came up with 4 topical clusters, so to speak. So one is climate and energy, because I agree we have to think together mitigation and adaptation, because they are interlinked in a certain sense. So that was climate and energy. And then the second was, agriculture, food, and nature. That's about biodiversity, what we do with biodiversity in terms of our food production. Yeah? And then fourth, there is raw materials, yeah? And the circular economy and what we do with them. And then fourth, not to forget, spatial planning, because this has to be organized in space. So we have classical spatial problems or challenges, urbanization processes. And these urbanization processes are still there, and we have to relate them to the new challenges, which are the sustainable development, et cetera, et cetera. So then we had 4 clusters, yeah? And that was a good starting point, because the knowledge was organized there, and these were clusters or interdependent topics. But now, of course, we are aware of the fact that these topical clusters cannot be separated from one another. So you have to start to rethink, how are they interrelated? And what we discover is that in a certain sense, you could see climate and energy as some sort of vertical program. And biodiversity is a vertical program. And you could see the other 2, spatial planning and raw materials, as much more horizontal programs, right? So there are all kinds of interconnections. And that's the way I think. It's not to say that this is a blueprint, yeah? It's because it will change tomorrow. Because it's a program on the move, so to speak. So that's, I think, a way to think through the different scales and the different challenges and the different temporal zones in which they are situated, and then think through how they are interrelated. Because, again, as I said before, I think it would be a mistake to see deltas as isolated topical areas, because they have become deltas not by themselves, they've become deltas because they interact with river basins and sea levels, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to take the entire ecosystem into account and then try to figure out a program which is on the one hand facing the complexity and the challenges, nature-based solutions and beyond that, but on the other hand also can be accountable, because policymakers want to make accountable programs. So you have to organize accountability, and on the other hand also be flexible and adaptive to change in the context of changing circumstances. So,
You also, again, emphasize the role of knowledge. That brings me back to you, Arjen. So what Hans actually says, a programmatic approach is needed. How do you apply this in your program, and how more, maybe even precisely, how do you deal with, for instance, the variety of institutes? I mean, this is maybe doable in your program, but also from my perspective, of course, as stated, I hear that also Jan-Marie say, we usually start with saying what we are proud of, but then comes the but, and that I also have that feeling, for instance, with our knowledge ecosystem. It's something we are proud of, but there is so much more room for maneuver, particularly for improvement, if you want to collaborate. But how do you do that? Because it's not just by putting people or organizations together or put a frame on it or put a program on it. It's also in the minds of people. Actually, Annemieke also touched upon it a little bit, the sharing and who you work together with or not. How do you deal with that in practice?
In several ways. Do I have a mic?
You will have
Okay.
immediately. Yes?
We do so in several ways. I hear you. Well, first of all, we do so by indeed, let's say, bringing all these people together, the transdisciplinarity. So that means indeed not also the accountability, so the finance perspective, governance. It's not to forget. We can engineer, we can design a lot of solutions, and we can even find money for it. But making it happen within the constraints of governance trajectories, that delays a lot. We all know that, and we don't have time. So that's also a perspective. And just to link back to the story of Annemarie with Deltares, she called it emulsifiers. Well, we have something in the Resilient Delta, we have a theme which is called methodology. It just focuses on how to, let's say, make this transdisciplinary approach really, you could say, viable and really effective. And we call that gluons. We need gluons, which is referring to particle science. You need gluons who actually teach us all to learn how to work in a transdisciplinary way, which goes beyond multidisciplinary. What we are doing already for years, or we think we are doing, but I think what we need is really this integrated and transdisciplinary approach to make it really a systems thinking, a systems perspective change. And designers help a lot, so this is also why, for instance, we put forward this, let's say, a large investment in our program to Chris's team on the designing perspective of like looking ahead, so and also thinking proactively instead of responsive. But then, of course, you also need the finance perspective, the governance. You need actually, there's a lot of, you could almost call it a bias, that it's not just about paying for the transitions, but it's also that our challenges will change our ability to pay for these transitions. There's already investment stops on certain areas in deltas. So there's a lot of challenges, and I don't want to make it more complex, but what we aim to do is to focus on this methodology as a main focus as scientists on helping practitioners in practice, people in governance positions, and of course engineers and designers.
And do you see that as merely a organizational exercise, or
no,
do you know
no,
you're also concerned about how you get the cultural change, or maybe even the change in the heads of the people,
yes,
if that's required?
It sounds very abstract, methodology, but of course it is. We try to apply this, so we really apply this into this settings through, let's say, the programs like Redesigning the Deltas, connected to the 5 areas in this case in the Dutch Delta, but also through how this could be translated to the other deltas. We are represented here with these 5 other deltas, and I think it's very important that they taught us a lot of lessons, and I think it was very valuable to hear their stories about this. Let's say this, that we need to make choices, that we have difficulties in so many other things. I mean, it's not just about building back what we have or securing what we have. It's also about building back better, it was said before, and also about how to deal with prioritization, how to prioritize food over industry, over well-being, over those are very, let's say, crucial questions, values.
Yeah, and if you move from there, so I would say that, of course, it's about the people also. Not surprisingly, Annemieke started also with the recollection of her past, because apparently, Jan-Marie, how do you see that? How do you see, let's say, the social capital and the big plans that are ahead, and the role of landscape planners.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
needs to be done in addition maybe to organizational interventions, but also to breed a new species or generation of landscape planners?
Maybe in the word landscape, you feel that people are rooted in landscape, and it's the surrounding we love. Whereas spatial planning, space is something out there that's not comes not close to your heart. So I think we need to develop language and images that come close to the heart, and that's what I like very much in your what did you say, the locally led adaptation, because both politics or a policy, I should say, and research is specialized in sectors or disciplines, and what we need is this holistic approach. And if you take a household, then all your clusters are in the household. They have their household economy, and they have their transport, and they have their food, and they have their home and their spatial planning, how to organize their house and their garden. So starting from the households and from the people's perspective, I think we are, as researchers and politicians, invited to think holistically. So that's, for me, the real paradigm shift, both in politics, policy, and in research. This transdisciplinary approach, starting from people, and that's the real paradigm shift I think we need.
Interesting. That also brings me to a word that I have not heard so far, but I'm sure if that connects, maybe to Gijs or Hans, yeah.
Could I give a soft plea for a systemic approach, going along with this human-based approach? Because I think otherwise we have to combine different systemic dynamics. Yeah. We can't just reduce it to the local, because things are interlinked. I mean, the glacier, the melting of the glaciers is influencing the river, and the flow of the river is influencing the deltas. So you can't restrict it to the experience of people in Rotterdam. You have to relate the experience of the people in Rotterdam to what's changing in the River Rhine and what's changing in the glaciers. So you have to include. You have to.
But it's a starting point for me.
I don't know. Of course, you have to interact. You have to create the interaction between local level knowledge and experience and histories and identities, etc., etc. But you'll have to relate them to a systemic level of change. Climate thinking, of course, does that. I mean, we only become aware of climate change when we have droughts or we have floods, etc., etc. But before the droughts and the floods were the scientists who were aware of the fact that something was changing in our climate system. So that systemic thinking was ahead, in a certain sense, of our experience. So I think we also need that systemic thinking to be included in one way or another in the making of our knowledge programs and our plans.
And then the question is maybe how do you connect those two without one being more important than the other? That could maybe also a question to Gijs from the example you just mentioned, because what you actually said is what you've learned is that we or people forgot about the people. But actually what Hans is saying, if you just focus on the people, so the many people, the more opinions you have. So how, and as a designer in your case, you build big things. So how do you balance thinking in terms of structures, but also listening to people?
Well, if you want people to listen to you, then it better be about something that they care about. Yeah. So I think we should also look at ourselves. I was thinking, the word program has been mentioned a lot. Well, if you're in a program, usually something's wrong with you. And if you use a method for losing weight or getting fit or whatever, there's also something you want to work about. But the thing is, programs and methods are not your identity. And if you want it to be about something that people are really interested in, you have to be bold enough to make it into a centerpiece of discussion and of attention. And that means, I think, also this paradigm shift, that this is, hey people, this is maybe the most important thing of the coming 40, 50 years. And this requires not only a cerebral approach, but also an emotional approach. And we have not even begun to go into the methodology of that. And that is really something that, coming back again to Jakarta, I think that was the main issue, that in the beginning there was not the time to really address in the methodology of the NCITD this factor. We did it, it's all in the books, it's all in the big files that nobody reads. All the attention was there, but it was not positioned in the right way. And so also look at Peter with this bigger sense of urgency that everybody in this meeting room feels. How are we going to find the right path into combining the energy that is in all this research and in all these ideas to get that across? So we need poets, we need people who can find the words and also the images, of course, to get that done.
Very valuable recommendation. And I also had to think of the Dutch Delta program and maybe also Rotterdam with Arnoud here. You're both not mic'd, so maybe I'll speak for them. But the impression that I got is in the Netherlands and maybe also in Rotterdam specifically, what Gijs is saying to a certain extent, that the identity is considered, let's say, a resource in itself. So in the Netherlands, we see ourselves as a Delta country, and in Rotterdam, we see ourselves as a Delta River adaptive city. And that's, I think, also, do you agree with that? As a value.
Can I contribute?
Yeah. Who was that? Sorry,
Anthony.
Anthony, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm following the discussion. I just wanted to quickly chip in that along the same line, I think it's also important to mainstream gender in building resilient deltas. So I think we shouldn't lose sight of that. That is very key. And also in the context of the ongoing UN Decade of the Ocean, I think it's also important to see how we tie that in, particularly in terms of ocean literacy activities. Because at the end of the day, the deltas empty into the sea. So, and coastal communities need to really understand and carry people along, particularly in Africa, where ocean literacy and oceanographic activities are very, very, very little understood. So I just wanted to quickly chip that in before I lose my thought. I think it's something going forward, probably we will look at, just like the Bangladesh colleague suggested, the Delta countries adaptation goals, which I think it needs to be followed up. I was also thinking in the line of probably maybe Delta countries ocean literacy initiative. How do we take that forward? Yeah, I just had to quickly drop that in.
Okay. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you. Much appreciated. And then we have to wrap up because in a couple of minutes because we'll move to lunch. But there's two other Delta Wing coordinators, and if the connection is good enough, maybe Chao Kwang, do you have maybe one takeaway or maybe a bit of a teaser for your session tomorrow? Maybe also what is it that you'd like to share? Some famous last words for this roundtable?
Yes, very much. I may share my viewpoint redesigning Delta in the Mekong Delta case. Actually, Mekong Delta now are facing with many uncertainty. Yeah. Due to the impact of the human activity and unsustainable management and climate change, so the delta is rapidly degraded. And delta is facing with many pressures such as climate change, sea level rise, salinity, drought, upstream hydropower, etc. So we would like to move toward a sustainable and robustness Mekong Delta. We need to address the root cause of problem, not symptom. And a radical design approach may be a breakthrough solution for Mekong Delta. As a case of Mekong Delta, I think from the viewpoints of the redesign approach, I think we have to show some main challenges as could be identified such as the capacity and flexibility of the current system to cope with climate change and non-climate change uncertainty, and the transboundary issues such as water use and management, sedimentation from upstream country, and the conservation of the unique ecology system and biodiversity in the delta, and the conflict between the short-term and long-term vision, and the lack of uncertainty of information and data used for the redesign process, and also the sustainability of the current policy and technical criteria for the innovative design. Actually, I think Delta also have a very good opportunity for the redesigning approach due to we have just approved a new Delta plan in February of 2022. So in these plans, the new development perspective and the approach of planning have many opportunities because the Mekong Delta now oriented, developed in the direction of sustainability, green drought, and adaptation to climate change. So, and the holistic and multidisciplinary and integrated approach have been applied to address the issue of water, transportation, ecosystem, preservation, sustainability. I think when we move to the new objective, so we need an innovation design paradigm is required to achieve the object of the master plan 20 and 22. Okay. So,
Quang, Quang, how much more time do you need? Because I have to wrap up.
I think that's all. I just share some about the redesigning Delta in Delta K. That's all. Yeah.
Okay. Because, like I said, we have to wrap up for the lunch. But you'll also be present tomorrow in one of the sessions, isn't it, Quang?
Yes.
Okay, and the same goes for Peter. Peter, apologies that I have not involved you in this session because you've already had quite a impressive speech that blew us away. And the good news is also that apparently you will be flying tomorrow to the Netherlands anyway. So if you want to meet him alive, there's an opportunity tomorrow. And also, Anthony, thank you for joining us. Keep up the good work in that beautiful, big, and special Delta. Yeah, thank you, Peter. And also to the panelists for quite some interesting notions, I think, and I hope that will resonate maybe throughout the remainder of the day and tomorrow, and hopefully also maybe in the program to come. And I'd like to give the floor to Chris again to maybe or to say what the plan now is.
I think we are done.
But what about lunch?
We need a break. I think we had a very lively and useful morning session. We have a break, and after the break we will continue with the scientists and experts to give their feedback on what they had heard today. And we have the exhibition, and maybe there's somebody from the exhibition who can briefly explain what can we see. Can you do that?
This exhibition is for tomorrow.
For tomorrow, but there's also something to see here.
There's also an exhibition in the back. I'm not sure if someone would like to explain the exhibition. transitional studios, I believe, exhibition. There's some exhibition.
That was not very clear, by the way.
That will be explained later, maybe.
It will be explained later.
Okay.
Let's have a break, yeah?
Thank you, panelists.
Thank you all. Oh.
And